Spring practice is right around the corner, and for some players, this is their last real chance to make an impact at Notre Dame. Will they step up or get left behind? That's coming up on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. My name is Wojciak and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and I'm thrilled to have you here on Thursday, March 6th, and thanks for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later on in the episode. Quick reminder to subscribe on YouTube or your preferred podcast platform. Also, wanted to remind you that we are doing another Friday mailbag on the show tomorrow. So if you've got questions you want answered, send them my way in the YouTube comments or on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. As for today, we're going to highlight the players who I believe are facing a make or break situation in spring practice. Believe it or not, the start of spring ball is just over a week away, and even though the importance of spring practice in college football as a whole is on the decline, I actually just saw Oklahoma canceled their spring game, and they usually have a turnout of like 60,000 people who tune into that game in person every single year. So there's teams across college football who are canceling their spring games. Spring practice might not mean as much because the season continues to get longer and longer. It is still crucial for those fringe players who are fighting for playing time. So today I'm going to break down 6 Notre Dame players, mostly juniors or older, who need to step up this spring or they risk never becoming impact players for the Irish. There is one notable exception to this rule, which I'll get to later, but these are the guys who've been in the program long enough that if they don't make a move now, it's hard to see it ever happening, and there will probably be some players that could fit this description that I won't mention. That's probably because I've already given up on the idea that they could ever be impact players for Notre Dame. It's unfortunate, but that's just the reality of football at all levels. Every one of the players I talk about today are guys who I believe are capable of being productive players for the Irish, even if they haven't shown it yet. I've ranked them in order of who has the most at stake to least, and we begin with the quarterback who could get left behind in the competition if he does not make a move in the spring, and that is Kenny Minchey, quarterback going into his redshirt sophomore season. Right now, it's a 3-man race to be the starting quarterback at Notre Dame, and I feel pretty confident that after the spring, it will be a 2-man race, and one of these guys is going to leave. And I feel pretty safe in my assumption that CJ Carr is not going to be the guy to leave. So that really brings it down to Steve Angeli or Kenny Minchey. I do expect one of them will not be on the team after spring practice, after that spring transfer portal window. Steve Angeli is going to go into the spring as the one. He's earned that. He's been around the longest. He's played meaningful football for Notre Dame on Saturdays and in the college football playoff, and Notre Dame gave him a ton of opportunities last year to come in case Riley Leonard ever got hurt. Like, Notre Dame would have a big lead in the second half, and Jelly would come in before all the other backups so that he could be out there with the ones. I think what that shows you is that there is a significant amount of separation between Steve Angeli and the next man up, who at the time was Kenny Minchey, because CJ Carr missed basically the entire season as he was dealing with an elbow injury. It sounds like Minchey is starting spring practice as the third guy. He might get the second reps, if that makes sense, just because he has CJ Carr in terms of experience. But if he can just work himself into the backup spot after spring practice, like if he's the clear number 2, I think that's big for him, and I think he'll actually have a chance to win the job in the fall. But what he needs to show throughout the spring is smart decision-making, mobility, command of the offense, and the ability to throw the ball downfield. I think that his decision-making could be the one thing that holds him back. We've heard Gino Guidugli refer to him as a gunslinger, and that's great when it works out. It's not so great when you're throwing the ball to the other team. I talked about this before when I broke down the case for and against every single quarterback. I think that Kenny Minchey is the most mobile of any of these guys. He might be the one best suited for the design quarterback run game, which we know Mike Denbrock likes to run. So he's got to show that in spring practice, which admittedly will be difficult because he's probably going to be wearing a red jersey more often than not. But if he struggles in spring practice, or the other two guys, Steve Angeli and CJ Carr, just outplay him, then you have Kenny Minchey as a third-string quarterback with a guy who's younger than him in front of him, and I just don't really see a path for him. And to be clear, I think Kenny Minchey is a very talented player. I am not writing him off. A lot of other people are looking at this quarterback competition as a two-man race between Steve Angeli and CJ Carr, and I will say a lot of those people think that way because that's apparently what people in the Goog are telling people on the outside. I think Kenny Minchey deserves a shot to be the starting quarterback, but it's going to have to happen in this spring. This is his third spring practice with the program. He basically got a pass for the first one because he was just an early enrollee freshman trying to learn everything and soak it all in. Last year, we knew he didn't have a chance to be the starting quarterback, but I do think he missed out on an opportunity to earn the position as backup quarterback because Riley Leonard missed basically all of spring practice, and it was just Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchey, and CJ Carr getting reps. Carr was the early enrollee freshman. Like, Kenny Minchey could have jumped Steve Angeli in that moment, but it didn't happen. I think Steve Angeli gained some separation as the season went on, but now is his first chance to be the starter in spring, and he has to take advantage of it. Personally, I'm very excited to see how he performs over the next month because I think he's a very intriguing player, and if he plays as well as I think he can, this quarterback race can get really interesting going into the summer. All right, next on the list, I've got wide receiver KK Smith. He's going to be entering his third season with the program. He's only a redshirt sophomore, so he has 3 years left of eligibility. But if he doesn't make a move now, he's going to get lost on the depth chart. Going into spring, we know that he's going to be behind Malachi Fields and Will Pauling. Those are the two transfers that Notre Dame brought in to provide a boost. Now, even though Fields and Pauling play different positions than Smith, because Fields is a boundary, Will Pauling is a true slot receiver, those are two guys who are going to take up a lot of reps. Same with Jane Greathouse and Jordan Faison. They are in the same class as KK, and they've already proven themselves at Notre Dame. They're very good receivers, and Jaden Greathouse could be wide receiver 1 next season. So he's already behind two guys in his class. Then you've got the young guys like Micah Gilbert, Logan Saldate, Cam Williams. They're going to be competing for time as well this season, but this is a prime opportunity for KK Smith because a few of those veteran guys I just mentioned aren't going to participate in spring practice. Jordan Faison is going to be playing for the Notre Dame lacrosse team. Faison is the starting field receiver, and I think if you look at the depth chart right now, it would go Faison, then KK Smith as a backup. So now, with Faison playing lacrosse, Smith is going to have legitimate first-team reps as the starting field receiver. He has to take advantage of that because this is an opportunity that's not really going to come around. And even though there's no way that he just supplants Faison and takes away all of his reps this season, if he can show that he has some of that elusiveness, some of that speed that Faison has, he's going to find a way on the field. Malachi Fields is hurt, so that's another receiver who's not going to be playing as much, who we know will be getting time in the fall. Even though it's a different spot, it's still important. Same with Jane Greathouse. He might get reps as the field receiver, but I think most of his time is going to be spent in the slot. Same with Will Pauling. So it's all setting up perfectly for KK Smith. But the issue is he's coming off another shoulder injury. He suffered a clavicle injury back in November of last season, missed the rest of the year, and he's dealt with shoulder injuries throughout his time at Notre Dame. He missed his entire freshman season because he was dealing with a shoulder injury. I think he had surgery the summer before his freshman year, and as we know, shoulder injuries have a tendency to come back, and the fact that he's already had a couple in his college career is a bit concerning, but if he's healthy and ready to go in the spring, he certainly has to take advantage of it, and he has shown flashes. Like, he had 3 catches for 38 yards last season, had a nice 25-yard reception against Stanford, so we know that it's in there. He has a ton of speed, but he needs to show an ability to stay healthy, for one, in spring practice, and he has to show strong hands. He actually had 2 bad drops in limited action last season, including one, I think it was from Angeli, on an absolutely perfect ball thrown his way. He wasn't able to haul it in, so he has to be consistent with his hands, and he has to show the ability to separate because we know he's got speed. That's why Notre Dame went out and got him as a recruit. He was a 3-star prospect out of Texas. He was committed to Texas Tech at the time, but they were able to flip him, and I think Tommy Rees was the offensive coordinator who really led that recruitment, and he just talked about how fast KK was and how he could be an impact player early on in his career. Injuries derailed that. Now, in his third season, he has a chance to showcase that. But if he struggles, then those young guys could end up jumping him on the depth chart, and there might not be a spot for KK Smith going into the future. Notre Dame needs speed, and KK Smith certainly has it. But if he can't do all the other stuff that you need to do to stay on the field, then unfortunately, that speed's not going to be doing anyone any favors on the bench. All right, those two have a ton at stake for sure, but they're not alone. Coming up, we're going to take a look at an offensive lineman who has shown a ton of potential, but is at risk of getting passed over, and a defensive lineman who has to produce something, or else the Irish could be in trouble. That's next on Locked On Irish. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets, these guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week are the Houston Cougars. Since joining the Big 12 last season, the Cougars have gone a combined 33-4 in conference games, winning the regular season title by multiple games both years. There's no team in college basketball that more capably embodies the rugged Armada than Kelvin Sampson's squad. Houston's tenacious defense leads the nation in fewest points allowed per game for the second straight season. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Houston Cougars have done here. It's clear that our Team of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Okay, next on the list, we've got Armel Mukam. Notre Dame needs Mukam to make a jump this year, and it starts in the spring. No, he's not going to start, but Notre Dame desperately needs help on the interior of that defensive line. We've talked about it at length on this show. It's been established, repeated, everything. And even though Mukam isn't going to start, if he provides a quality rotational piece, that goes a long way for this season because guys are going to get hurt. We saw that last year, pretty much every position except quarterback, but especially on the defensive line. And when you rotate this many guys and you have more fresh legs coming in who are quality players, that is a huge boost to your entire defense. Notre Dame does not have many known commodities on the interior. They've got Jared Dawson, who's the transfer from Louisville, who I think is going to be really good. They've got Gabriel Rubio, who I think is going to start alongside Dawson. And they've got Donovan Heinisch. That's it. Those are three quality players, not necessarily elite, but good enough. Then behind them, it's a ton of question marks. Jason Onye looks like he's going to return to the team, but his status is still up in the air a little bit. I do expect him to participate in the spring, but considering what happened last year, I just don't know if you can count on him throughout the season, right? We don't know if Jason Onye is going to have just another leave or anything like that, but it'd be great if he comes in and he is just really good from the jump, but I don't think you can really rely on that if you're Notre Dame. We also don't know much about Elijah Hughes, the transfer from USC, other than he has a couple years left of eligibility. He played 4 games each of the past 2 years at USC, and he's a bit of a project. I think Notre Dame is taking a risk there, a light risk at that, and they're hoping for a big reward, but we don't know much about Elijah Hughes, and that leaves Mukam, Brennan Vernon, and Devin Houston before you get to Cole Mullins and Sean Civillano Jr. Mukam, Vernon, and Houston are older, but I'm just going to get out in front of this. I don't expect Brennan Vernon or Devin Houston to ever be impact players for Notre Dame in their career. I don't even have them on my list. Maybe they'll prove me wrong. I hope they do. I'm not counting on them, but I do think that Armel Mukam has a chance to provide a boost to the interior of that defensive line, and he needs to step up in the spring because they need it. And if Mukam can't do it, they're probably going to try out Sean Civillano Jr., who I think has a bright future. Notre Dame certainly needs his size, but he's not really in great shape yet. He came in as a really, really big dude. He's been working out hard. I mean, in all the workout videos, he's got like 5 layers on so he can lose weight, but I still think he's a year away. Cole Mullins is a player who is on the opposite end of the spectrum. He's a little bit undersized, but I do think he has a bright future, but he probably needs a year of putting on strength before he's a factor. So that really leaves Mukam in a spot where he has to produce. He has to come through this spring, and if he doesn't carve out a role this spring and he's just not a factor on this team, I just don't think it's going to happen, and it puts the entire defensive line in a bind. We have talked about the misses on the recruiting trail on the defensive line as of late, and it's been several years now in a row, but they really, really need Armel Mukam to come in and step in. And if you remember, Mukam was the guy that they got to commit after Keon Keeley ended up flipping to Alabama. They needed someone. They went out and they got Mukam, and they saw a bunch of great physical tools. But in order for him to be an impact player, he needed to take some time and learn how to play football because he had not really been playing football that long in his career. That's not an excuse anymore. Now is his time. He's got to make some plays. He needs to show consistency, ability to play with some leverage, and physicality in the trenches. I think physicality is the most important thing that Notre Dame needs to see out of Mukam. Like, he's kind of learned all the other stuff about football, but you need to have that dog in you if you want to play defensive tackle at Notre Dame. He needs to showcase that throughout the spring. And if he struggles, Notre Dame might be forced to take another Elijah Hughes type player in the transfer portal, because they're going to go after a starter regardless. They need more proven guys on the defensive line. But if they're in a situation where Mukam can't really produce and they just need to get a rotational guy, they're going to have to go out and find a guy and take a flyer on someone. And that's not really the position that you want to be in coming out of spring practice. But hopefully Mukam will step up and Notre Dame won't feel the need to add another rotational player. They'll feel good about where they're at. But there's a lot at stake for Armel Mukam in spring. Next up, we got offensive lineman Sullivan Absher. Notre Dame's offensive line is loaded with talent, and I feel like Sullivan Absher is a guy who you heard a lot about maybe going into last season as someone who had a really bright future at Notre Dame, but his name is not coming up nearly as much going into this season. This is a guy who the coaches raved about behind the scenes for his first 2 years on campus, but you look at what happened last year on Notre Dame's offensive line, the amount of guys that they rotated in throughout the year. Like, if you had told me before the start of last season, like let's rewind to the start of fall camp 2024, and you told me Notre Dame is going to start a young guard without any starting experience over Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler, who would it be? I think most people would have guessed it would have been Sullivan Absher, because that is how highly we thought of Absher as a potential player on that offensive line. Instead, Notre Dame went with Sam Pendleton. I think that caught everyone by surprise, right? Because not only are you picking a young guy over two guys who have a ton of starting experience, no one was talking about Sam Pendleton going to fall camp of last season. So that was pretty telling. And then after Sam Pendleton got benched, and then they went with Spindler, and then Coogan took over as the starting center, like, there were other opportunities for a backup guard to come in. Sam Pendleton came back in against Indiana when Rocco Spindler went down. Then Charles Jagasaw came in against Penn State. Like, there were times when Notre Dame could have put Sullivan Absher in the game, and they just didn't do it. To me, this spring is about finding a permanent home for Sullivan Absher, because at one point he was going to be a tackle, then they moved him inside to guard, and then he was kind of backed up behind some of those guys that I just mentioned, and now he goes into the spring as the backup left guard to Billy Schrauth. But Billy Schrauth is one guy who you can count on is going to start on this offensive line. I think if you look at the starting group, 3 out of the 5 spots are taken by Emil Wagner, Charles Jagasaw, and Billy Schrauth. Now, we can talk more about whether Charles Jagasaw is going to be the starting left tackle or if they're going to move him to guard, which could make room for Gerby Lambert. It doesn't really matter. All we know is that Charles Jagasaw is going to be on the starting offensive line next season. So that leaves 2 spots. And if Ashton Craig is healthy at center, that's probably 4 out of 5, because Ashton Craig is a really good center, but he suffered that torn ACL injury against Purdue. We don't know when he's going to be back at 100%. I expect him to be back and ready to practice by the start of fall camp, but as we saw for Mitchell Evans in his recovery timeline after his torn ACL, you never really know when they're going to be back to 100%. So that's important as it pertains to Sullivan Absher, because maybe that's one more spot that opens up. And, Anthony Knapp is a guy who could play center. Like, there are different moves that can be made. But Gerby Lambert, Anthony Knapp, Sullivan Absher, and maybe there's a surprise that we aren't even talking about, because we've seen that happen back-to-back years now under Joe Rudolph. Like, there are only 2 spots left, and other guys have starting experience like Anthony Knapp, and Gerby Lambert looks like he could be a future NFL first rounder with his physical traits. So Absher has to make a jump now and at least really fight for that starting spot, because if he doesn't, I just don't really see it happening for him, because Notre Dame just has so many talented young offensive linemen, and this group has just talent across the board. Now they're a little bit more experienced, and I feel like Sullivan Absher is a guy who's always shown that he has potential. Now he needs to show that he can be consistent. He needs to be technically sound in whatever position they stick him at, whether it be guard or tackle. I feel very confident it's going to be guard, because they already have Jagasaw, Wagner, Lambert, and then Will Black coming in, the true freshman, to play tackle. I think he also just has to hold his own against Notre Dame's defensive front and be consistent on a day-to-day basis. There's also been some concerns about his footwork, but I think he can get that figured out. And if he struggles, this spring, then he's just at risk of being jumped by these young guys. And, I don't think there's ever really a path for him to be a starter at Notre Dame and just a career backup, which, hey, Notre Dame needs all the depth they can have at the offensive line. We saw how important that was last year. But if Sullivan Absher is going to be the guy that we thought he could be as recently as like a year ago, we need to see it in the spring. All right. Coming up next, we got two more guys to get to, including a former 5-star recruit and a linebacker fighting to stay relevant in a crowded room. That's coming up next right here on Locked On Irish. All right, two make-or-break players left for Notre Dame in spring practice, and this next one is going to surprise you. I've got wide receiver Cam Williams. Now, before you freak out about this pick, let me explain. Because I look at the Cam Williams situation in a totally different light than the rest of the guys on this list. For one, he's only going to be a redshirt freshman this upcoming season, so if he doesn't have a great spring, he could still be a very good player for the Irish down the road. He's the only underclassman that I included on this list. But the goals and expectations for Cam Williams coming out of high school were not to just be a good player. Notre Dame wasn't hoping to just get another solid rotation piece. They thought they were getting an elite wide receiver, one that they haven't had since like Will Fuller. Chase Claypool was elite for one season, but a true game breaker with speed that could just dust any cornerback in front of him, could take a tunnel screen and take it to the house. Notre Dame hasn't had that since Will Fuller in 2015. We're looking at a full decade, right? That's far too long for a place like Notre Dame. But Cam Williams, coming out of high school, he was the guy who had the speed, who had the agility, who had the elusiveness to potentially be the next guy of that caliber. He was the 47th ranked player in his class in the 24/7 Sports Composite, and at one point he was a 5-star recruit. When the rankings finished out, he was a really high 4-star, but still, considering where Notre Dame recruiting has been over the past decade, that was a huge get for Notre Dame. Also, he was paired with C.J. Carr. They were going to be like the dynamic duo going forward. But then Williams didn't even make a dent on the depth chart as a true freshman. As a matter of fact, Micah Gilbert, another freshman, got more playing time than Cam Williams. It wasn't a lot. It wasn't like Micah Gilbert was out there running with the ones ever, but Gilbert was definitely higher on the depth chart than Cam Williams. Then you look around the country, you see Ryan Williams at Alabama. You see Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. Those were two of the best wide receivers in college football last year as true freshmen. I would put Jeremiah Smith as like the best player overall in college football as a true freshman. He is a freak, and we all saw that in the national championship game. But look, I get it. Not everyone is fully formed their freshman season like Jeremiah Smith, who looks like he's 27 years old as an 18-year-old. So I understand that we can't expect Cam Williams to be on the same timeline as a Jeremiah Smith or Ryan Williams because those two are outliers. But the reason I have Williams on the list is this. If he's not able to make a move this spring, and he's still buried on the depth chart going into his sophomore season, and he doesn't really get much playing time at all, that's a sign we need to lower our expectations about what Cam Williams can be in college. Could he be a good player? Absolutely. He doesn't need to have a great spring to eventually be a good wide receiver in college. But if he's going to be that truly elite wide receiver one, he's going to have to show flashes this spring, or else I doubt it's ever going to happen. Look at Will Fuller. Barely made a dent his freshman year, sophomore year, 15 touchdowns. And wide receiver is not like offensive line. You don't need years and years to physically develop. Like if you are truly an elite athlete, if you have elite speed, you're going to find your way on the field in some capacity by your second season. You might not be polished. They might not trust you on every down. But if you are that good, you have that kind of speed, that kind of athleticism, then you can go out there, you can run a screen, you can run a go route and make a play. Notre Dame is going to put you in the game plan because you have elite traits. If Cam can't even do that as a sophomore, then I just don't think he's ever going to be a star player. The best case for Cam Williams, if he doesn't have a great sophomore season, is Miles Boykin or Chase Claypool, which would be good, right? Miles Boykin ended up being a really good receiver for Notre Dame. Same with Chase Claypool. But we also remember them for what they were at the end of their career. It took them a little bit longer to get to that point, but even Claypool had 29 catches for 402 yards and 2 touchdowns as a sophomore. That's a pretty good season. Now, Miles Boykin did not put up those kinds of numbers as a sophomore. He only had 6 receptions for 81 yards and a touchdown in 2016. That was his redshirt freshman season, but still, Cam Williams needs to make a move now if he's even in the rotation, because right now I would not put him in the top 6. He needs to have a big spring to even put himself in contention. And if Williams turns out to be anything like Boykin or Claypool, I think that'd be a big win. If you got one really good season out of Williams as like a senior, that would be pretty good, right? But we all hoped for more when Cam Williams was a recruit, and I think that's why so many fans are asking about him. Like, why doesn't he get talked about? Well, he just hasn't shown enough yet. So he needs to show an understanding of the playbook and consistency. He needs to gain trust of the coaching staff, because you can run fast in a straight line. Every single college football wide receiver at a Power 4 team is going to be able to do that. But it seems like they don't really trust him to go out there, be in the right spot at the right time. It's like it reminds you a little bit of Tobias Merriweather early on in his career. But if he can understand the playbook, he knows where he needs to be on any given play, he's consistent. And I'm not just talking about in games, I'm talking about practice, rep to rep. Can he bring that same level of intensity every single practice? That's important. And he has to show that he can be a polished route runner. It's not just outrunning the other guy. You have to generate separation. And I think if Cam Williams can show all of that in spring practice, then he'll be in good shape. But if he struggles again, and then he's just another guy at the end of the bench during his sophomore season, then maybe he'll be a solid piece down the road, but I don't think that he's ever going to be the game changer that Notre Dame hoped he would be. Last one here, linebacker, Preston Zinter. Zinter is already a really solid special teams player for Notre Dame. He appeared in every game last year for the Irish, racked up a few tackles in the third phase of the game, but if he ever wants to make it in the linebacker rotation, he's got to make a move now. And I actually think he can. I think Zinter has some real ability. That's why they put him out there on all the special teams, but he's pretty deep on the depth chart right now. I mean, Drake Bowen, Jalen Sneed, KVA, and Jane Osbury are going to get a lot of snaps next year. We know that for a fact, and I expect true freshman Madden Framo to be in the mix as well. But the best chance that Zinter has at getting on the field is by holding off Framo, even though Framo plays Mike linebacker. If Zinter can just force himself on the field, I think that's important, because Notre Dame already has 2 guys who can play Mike and Drake Bowen and KVA. So if he beats out Framo and gets in that mix, maybe as the 5th linebacker, that's huge for him. I don't really see a path for Zinter if he's not able to do that this spring. Framo's going to be there. He's an early enrollee freshman, so he's going to be competing with him right away. He's in the same class as Bowen and Osbury, so he's already behind those guys, and he's behind KVA as well. So he's not really in a great spot, but I think he has shown some speed and some instincts on special teams that make me believe he could potentially crack the linebacker rotation, but it's now or never for him. If he struggles, then I think the best case for him is he's just like a consistent special teams contributor, and he doesn't really ever have a chance of being a legitimate defensive player, but that could still be good. I mean, hey, Notre Dame has been recruiting really well at linebacker, and sometimes you have good players like Preston Zinter who aren't able to crack the rotation at their position, but they can still provide a ton on special teams. And maybe that's the path for Preston Zinter, but I think he is someone to watch during spring, because he could really make a move in this linebacker rotation. So there you have it. I've got quarterback Kenny Minchey, big spring for him for a bunch of obvious reasons. Wide receiver KK Smith. Notre Dame needs more speed at wide receiver. Armel Mukam, they need more depth on the interior of that defensive line. And then Sullivan Absher. It never hurts to have more good offensive linemen. I think Absher is a really quality offensive lineman. He just has to find a way on the field. And then Cam Williams. Is he going to be great? Maybe. We're going to have to start to see it this spring. And then Preston Zinter, kind of an under-the-radar, underrated prospect coming out of high school who could have a chance to crack the defense here. You know, maybe under Chris Ash, new defensive coordinator, he has a chance to make a great first impression, get on the field. But those are the guys who I'm going to be looking at this spring as make or break, now or never players for the Irish. But that is going to do it for me today. Reminder, I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning with the mailbag, so this is your last call to submit questions. Also, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. And if you enjoyed the show today, remember, like the video below, or if you liked what you heard on the pod, remember, rate the show 5 stars and leave a review, and I'll see you on Friday.